Justice has a price, and for Judge Vivian Blackwood, that price was 60 years behind bars. The gavel that once echoed in her courtroom now fell upon her own fate, a devastating reversal that shocked the legal community and captivated an entire nation. For decades, Judge Blackwood had sentenced criminals with unwavering conviction, her reputation built on fairness and an encyclopedic knowledge of the law. Yet in an astonishing twist, this paragon of justice meticulously planned and executed the murder of her former lover, transforming from respected jurist to convicted killer in a case that defies belief. Have you ever wondered what could drive someone who devoted their life to upholding the law to so deliberately break it? What psychological breaking point turns righteous anger into calculated homicide? The supreme irony of this case lies not just in Blackwood's fall from grace, but in how her downfall came about. This brilliant legal mind, a woman who had spent years dismantling criminal defenses and spotting the smallest legal flaws, overlooked the single detail that would seal her fate, a hidden camera she installed herself. Imagine the cold calculation, a judge using her intimate knowledge of criminal proceedings to craft what she believed was the perfect murder. Every contingency planned for, every potential evidence trail eliminated. Except for one. The very surveillance device she positioned to document her alibi became the prosecution's star witness, capturing in high definition the methodical execution of her deadly plan. When detectives discovered this footage, they couldn't believe their eyes. Frame by frame, they watched as one of their justice system's most respected figures administered a lethal cocktail to Calvin Roth, the man who had rejected her, with the precision of someone who knew exactly how to get away with murder. The camera doesn't lie, Detective Derek Stanton would later testify. And in this case, it told a story more compelling and disturbing than any confession could have. Tonight, we'll examine how passion warped into obsession, how rejection ignited revenge, and how a brilliant mind justified unconscionable actions. We'll trace the psychological journey from heartbreak to homicide, revealing how Judge Blackwood's meticulous planning contained the seeds of her undoing. If you've ever wondered how someone so respected could risk everything for revenge, hit that subscribe button and stay with me. This story goes beyond a simple crime of passion. It's a haunting reminder that intelligence without emotional control can lead anyone down a destructive path. And that in the end, justice finds us all. Vivian Blackwood's journey to the bench began in a modest household where her father, a high school civics teacher, instilled in her an unwavering respect for the law. By age 12, she could recite entire sections of the Constitution. While other children played make-believe, young Vivian held mock trials in her basement, always insisting on playing the judge, never the defendant, never the victim. The law provides structure in a chaotic world, she once explained in a rare personal interview. Without it, we're just animals fighting over scraps. This philosophy propelled her through law school, where she graduated summa cum laude from Harvard. Professors described her as ruthlessly prepared and intellectually formidable. One noted that Blackwood doesn't just understand the law, she communes with it. After a brief but distinguished career as a prosecutor, Blackwood ascended to the bench at just 36, one of the youngest judges in the state's history. Her courtroom quickly became known for its efficiency and strict adherence to procedure. Attorneys who appeared before her knew to arrive prepared or face her legendary disapproval. Judge Blackwood doesn't suffer fools, remarked defense attorney Martin Green. She can dismantle a weak argument with a single question. I've seen lawyers with decades of experience reduced to stammering first years under her gaze. Yet this severity was balanced by an uncompromising fairness. Her rulings, while strict, followed the letter and spirit of the law. Convicted criminals would often thank her, even as they were led away in handcuffs, for treating them with dignity throughout their proceedings. The judicial community recognized her excellence with multiple awards for judicial temperament and legal scholarship. Her opinions were frequently cited in appellate courts, and legal journals published her articles on constitutional interpretation and judicial ethics. But within this public triumph lay a private paradox. The woman who commanded such respect in her professional life struggled to maintain meaningful personal connections. Colleagues who attended rare dinners at her home described an almost uncomfortable transition, the authoritative judge becoming an awkward, overly formal host. She kept everyone at arm's length, said former clerk Jessica Winters. It was as if she feared personal attachments might compromise her professional judgment. This emotional isolation created a vulnerability few recognized. While Blackwood expertly navigated complex legal questions, she remained a novice in matters of the heart. Her romantic history consisted of brief, ultimately unsatisfying relationships with fellow legal professionals who respected her mind but never truly knew her heart. Until Calvin Roth entered her life. The respected judge who could silence a courtroom with a raised eyebrow had never learned to protect herself from rejection. The woman who projected perfect control harbored deep insecurities about her worth beyond her professional achievements. In this contrast lay the seeds of tragedy. A brilliant legal mind unprepared for the irrational territories of love, heartbreak, and the dangerous emotions that would eventually consume her. Calvin Roth entered Judge Blackwood's life not through her courtroom but at a charity gala for the State Bar Association. While most attendees approached her with professional deference, Calvin, an art curator with no ties to the legal world, asked about her opinion on abstract expressionism instead of recent court decisions. "He saw me as Vivian, not as Judge Blackwood," she later confided to her assistant. "Do you know how rare that is?" At 45, Calvin possessed a charisma that defied conventional description. His professional life revolved around beauty and subjective interpretation, a stark contrast to Vivian's world of precedents and statutes. Where she sought definitive answers, he embraced ambiguity. This fundamental difference fascinated her. Their first date lasted 7 hours. They began with dinner and ended watching sunrise from her apartment balcony, discussing everything from French cinema to quantum physics. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, Vivian Blackwood laughed without restraint. "When you spend your days determining people's fates, you forget how to just be human," she wrote in her journal. "Calvin reminds me there's a world beyond case files and legal briefs." Their romance bloomed with an intensity that surprised those few who witnessed it. The judge, who never took personal calls at work, began slipping away for lunch dates. Her calendar, once dedicated exclusively to legal obligations, now accommodated weekend trips to coastal towns and art exhibitions. For 8 months, Vivian experienced a happiness that had eluded her throughout her distinguished career. Calvin gave her handwritten notes with quotes from philosophers about love. She learned to cook elaborate meals just to see his expression of delight. They created private rituals. Sunday morning crosswords competed against each other, victory earning the right to choose their evening activity. Then came the subtle shifts. Calvin began checking his phone during their conversations. Weekend trips were postponed, then canceled. His explanations, work commitments, family obligations, seemed reasonable individually but formed a pattern that awakened Vivian's analytical mind. "Something's changed," she confronted him after he arrived an hour late to their anniversary dinner. "Nothing's changed," he insisted, but his eyes avoided hers. The judge who built her reputation on examining evidence couldn't ignore what was before her. She noticed lipstick on his collar, a shade she never wore. His credit card statements showed dinner reservations on nights he claimed to work late. Phone records revealed frequent calls to an unknown number. When the final confrontation came, it happened in her living room, the same space where they had shared countless intimate conversations. "I need space," Calvin said flatly. "This isn't working anymore." "Why not?" Vivian demanded, her courtroom instinct for truth asserting itself. "You're too intense, too controlling. This relationship feels like being cross-examined daily." He paused before delivering the fatal blow. "I've met someone else, someone who doesn't analyze every word I say." For a woman who had never lost control publicly, the rejection crushed more than her heart. It shattered her identity. The judge who commanded universal respect had been deemed unworthy of love. In that moment, something fundamental broke within Vivian Blackwood. The boundary between her professional commitment to justice and personal desire for retribution began to dissolve. Have you ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences might help others recognize warning signs before emotions turn destructive. In the weeks following Calvin's rejection, Judge Blackwood maintained her professional composure. She delivered rulings with her characteristic precision, appeared at scheduled public functions, and continued her morning runs through the park. Yet beneath this facade of normalcy, a psychological metamorphosis had begun. "I sentenced a man to 15 years today for armed robbery," she wrote in her journal. "He claimed desperation drove him to crime. I dismissed his excuse as irrelevant to justice. Now I wonder, what desperate acts might any of us commit when pushed beyond our limits?" Her once methodical mind now fixated on Calvin with disturbing intensity. She tracked his movements through social media, noting patterns in his schedule and activities with his new partner. What began as painful curiosity evolved into calculated surveillance. Dr. Eleanor Matthews, forensic psychologist who later reviewed the case, explained, "Judge Blackwood's professional identity was built on control and moral authority. When rejected, she experienced not just heartbreak but an existential threat to her core self. Her legal training, designed to seek justice, provided the intellectual framework to justify vengeance. The transformation happened incrementally. First came the fantasies of confrontation, imagined scenarios where she would force Calvin to acknowledge his betrayal. These evolved into more elaborate daydreams of public humiliation. Finally, during a murder trial in her courtroom, a dangerous idea crystallized. The defendant planned meticulously but made elementary mistakes. She noted in her chambers after court adjourned. "I could do better." This thought, initially abstract, became the seed of an obsession. The judge began studying her own cases with a different perspective, noting not the legal principles but the tactical errors that led to criminals' capture. Her clerk, Thomas Reed, noticed subtle changes, requests for files from old murder cases, late nights researching toxicology, unusual questions about digital surveillance. When he inquired, she dismissed his concerns with practiced judicial authority. "My continuing education never stops, Thomas. Knowledge of forensic advancements helps me evaluate expert testimony more effectively." Her home transformed as well. The bedroom once filled with memories of Calvin became a strategic headquarters. Maps tracking his movements covered one wall. Notes on his schedule filled a leather-bound planner. Research on undetectable poisons appeared in encrypted files on her computer. Dr. Matthews identified this as mission-oriented tunnel vision, a psychological state where complex ethical reasoning is replaced by simplified moral calculations that justify extreme actions. Her judicial training actually facilitated this process, Matthews explained. She approached revenge as she would a legal problem, identify the objective, anticipate obstacles, develop countermeasures. Perhaps most chilling were the warning signs visible in her courtroom conduct. When sentencing a crime of passion, she showed unusual empathy. "I understand how emotions can overwhelm reason," she told one defendant, a statement her colleagues found oddly out of character. Her judicial assistant noticed an alarming pattern. Judge Blackwood began requesting cases involving surveillance technology, digital evidence, and toxicology reports. She seemed almost studious, taking notes on detection methods and investigative procedures, the assistant later testified. The respected jurist who once represented justice's impartial application was methodically preparing to subvert the very system she had sworn to uphold. Judge Blackwood approached her revenge with the same analytical precision she applied to complex legal cases. Her strategy unfolded not as an emotional outburst but as a carefully constructed legal brief, each element building logically toward an inevitable conclusion. Justice requires careful preparation, she had often instructed young attorneys. Now she applied this principle to her darkest purpose. Her plan began with exhaustive research. Leveraging her judicial credentials, she accessed law enforcement databases containing forensic studies on detection methods for various toxins. She studied cold cases where perpetrators nearly succeeded, analyzing their critical errors. She reviewed trial transcripts of perfect crimes undone by single oversights. "The successful commission of murder," she noted clinically in a password-protected document, "depends not on eliminating evidence but on controlling what evidence remains." This principle guided her next steps. She needed 3 elements: an untraceable poison, a controlled environment, and a perfect alibi. Each required meticulous planning. For the poison, Judge Blackwood exploited her position on the Dangerous Substances Control Committee. During a scheduled inspection of a medical research facility, she pocketed a sample of an experimental compound known for its rapid absorption and metabolism. The substance, designed for anesthetic purposes, became lethal at increased dosages and metabolized into common bodily chemicals within hours. The committee would like additional information on storage protocols, she wrote officially, ensuring the missing sample wouldn't be connected to her visit. The controlled environment would be her home, specifically her study where she could manage all variables. Over 6 weeks, she modified the room methodically. She replaced the regular glasses in her bar cabinet with chemically treated versions that would accelerate the poison's effect. She installed sound-dampening panels behind artwork, ensuring no disturbance would alert neighbors. Attention to detail separates amateurs from professionals, she reminded herself, a mantra from her early days as a prosecutor. The final element, her alibi, required technological assistance. Here Judge Blackwood displayed both brilliance and the fatal flaw that would eventually destroy her. She purchased surveillance equipment through a series of anonymous transactions using cash and temporary email addresses. The cameras were installed throughout her home with one specific purpose, to be discovered later. Her plan was multi-layered. The primary system would record her apparent presence at home during the murder timeframe. A sophisticated loop of pre-recorded footage showing her working late in her office, far from her study where Calvin would meet his end. This system was meant to be found by investigators. The secondary system, her critical mistake, was designed as insurance. Hidden in an antique clock in her study, this camera would record the actual murder, providing her with leverage if an accomplice ever attempted blackmail. She planned to retrieve and destroy this footage immediately after the act. Redundancy protects against contingencies, she wrote, applying courthouse security principles to her criminal enterprise. With preparations complete, Judge Blackwood created the perfect pretext for Calvin's visit. Financial documents requiring his signature related to an investment they had shared during their relationship. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday evening, when her regular yoga class would normally provide witnesses to her whereabouts. She canceled the class but told colleagues she would attend, creating the first layer of her alibi. What she failed to consider was the possibility that the secondary camera's data might automatically back up to cloud storage, a feature activated by default that she had neglected to disable. This single oversight, a checkbox unticked during setup, would ultimately transform her perfect documentation of the crime from private insurance to public evidence. As Judge Blackwood finalized her preparations, she reviewed every detail with judicial thoroughness, confident in her superior planning. The woman who had spent decades identifying the flaws in criminal schemes believed she had created the perfect crime. She was wrong. Tuesday, October 12th arrived with a crystalline autumn chill. Judge Blackwood awoke at precisely 5:30 a.m., her regular time. She completed her morning routine with practiced efficiency, a 3-mile run, shower, light breakfast of yogurt and berries. Nothing in her demeanor suggested this day differed from any other. At precisely 6:45 p.m., she activated the surveillance system's primary recording loop. The digital display confirmed successful operation. On police inspection, these cameras would show Judge Blackwood working alone in her home office throughout the evening. The secondary camera hidden within the antique clock in her study began recording at 6:50 p.m. Its tiny lens captured her final preparations, arranging 2 crystal tumblers on a silver tray, positioning financial documents on the mahogany desk, adjusting the room's lighting to a warm, inviting glow. The doorbell rang at 7 p.m. exactly. Calvin Roth was nothing if not punctual. "Thank you for coming," Judge Blackwood said, her voice controlled as she welcomed him. The camera recorded her perfectly composed expression, professional, pleasant, betraying nothing of her intentions. Calvin's cologne, sandalwood, and bergamot filled the entryway. The scent once comforted her, now it fueled her resolve. He wore the charcoal suit she had once complimented, his silver-flecked dark hair neatly styled. "Let's make this quick," he said, checking his watch. "I have dinner plans at 8:30. With his new lover, she knew, though he didn't specify. Judge Blackwood nodded, leading him to the study. Her heartbeat remained steady at 62 beats per minute. She had checked with her fitness tracker, fascinated by her own physiological control. "Bourbon?" she offered, gesturing to the tray. The treated glass waited on the right. "Just one," Calvin replied, to make this less awkward. As she poured the amber liquid, her hand remained perfectly steady. 3 years earlier, she had sentenced a surgeon to 15 years for killing his wife with poisoned wine. An unsteady hand reveals criminal intent, the prosecutor had argued. Judge Blackwood had agreed in her verdict. The clock camera captured her measured movements as she handed him the treated glass, taking the untreated one for herself. Their fingers brushed briefly during the exchange, their first physical contact since the breakup. To clean endings, she toasted, her voice even. Calvin drank deeply, a man eager to conclude an uncomfortable meeting. Judge Blackwood sipped delicately, watching him over the rim of her glass. His throat worked as he swallowed, unaware of the compound now entering his bloodstream. "So what papers need my signature?" he asked, loosening his tie slightly. Judge Blackwood retrieved a folder, explaining the investment dissolution agreement with precise legal terminology. As she spoke, she monitored him closely. Within 4 minutes, he showed the first signs, a slight flush across his cheeks, a barely perceptible slurring of words. "Is it warm in here?" he asked, blinking rapidly. "The heating system runs hot this time of year," she replied smoothly. "Perhaps another drink would help?" He nodded, his coordination already compromised. She poured another measure into his glass, adding a higher concentration from a separate flask while his attention drifted to the financial papers. 8 minutes after the initial dose, Calvin's breathing became labored. His attempts to focus on the documents grew increasingly frustrated. The camera recorded his deterioration with digital precision, each frame documenting the poison's progression. "Something's wrong," he managed, attempting to stand but finding his legs unresponsive. "I feel strange." Judge Blackwood remained seated, her posture perfect. "Perhaps you should cancel your dinner plans," she suggested, her tone clinical. Recognition dawned in his eyes then. Understanding arriving too late. "Vivian, what have you done?" She leaned forward, her judicial mask falling away. "I'm delivering a verdict, Calvin. Guilty of betrayal in the first degree." His attempts to call for help manifested as gasping breaths. The clock camera recorded his collapse onto the Persian rug, the same one where they had once made love during a summer thunderstorm. Judge Blackwood checked his pulse at 7:24 p.m. Finding none, she methodically gathered her evidence. She removed the glass with his fingerprints, replacing it with an untreated duplicate. She adjusted his position to suggest a sudden cardiac event. Each action executed with precision, each step documented by the hidden lens she would soon retrieve. At 7:42 p.m., Judge Blackwood placed the call to emergency services. "Please hurry," she told the dispatcher, her voice breaking with practiced distress. "My ex-boyfriend collapsed during a meeting. I think he's had a heart attack." As sirens approached in the distance, she took one final look at Calvin's motionless form. Justice had been served, her justice, delivered outside the boundaries of law she had upheld for decades. What she didn't notice was the blinking light on the antique clock indicating active cloud synchronization of the footage that would eventually condemn her. Detective Derek Stanton arrived at Judge Blackwood's residence expecting a routine cardiac event investigation. With 20 years on the force and a reputation for methodical thoroughness, he approached each case with the same disciplined process regardless of who was involved. The initial scene appeared consistent with Judge Blackwood's statement, Stanton noted in his official report. Mr. Roth's position, the financial documents on the desk, and the judge's composed demeanor aligned with her account of a sudden medical emergency during a business meeting. The medical examiner preliminarily suggested natural causes. A heart attack in a middle-aged man with no known health issues. Standard procedure would have closed the case there, but Detective Stanton's instincts prompted further inquiry. Something felt rehearsed about her statement, he later testified. Not false necessarily, but precisely constructed, like a legal argument rather than a traumatic recollection. This subtle observation led Stanton to request toxicology screening beyond standard protocols. Meanwhile, his team conducted a thorough examination of Judge Blackwood's home, discovering the primary surveillance system. "She volunteered the footage immediately," recalled Officer Jensen, Stanton's partner, "almost eagerly, showing us time-stamped video of herself working in her office during the estimated time of death. This cooperation nearly ended their investigation, until a junior tech specialist made the critical discovery. While examining the home's digital devices, she found a cloud storage account linked to multiple cameras, including one not disclosed in the house tour. "There's another device backing up video," she informed Stanton. "Something inside the study itself." When detectives reviewed the secondary footage, the case transformed instantly. The hidden clock camera had captured everything. The poisoned drink, Calvin's deterioration, Judge Blackwood's calculated confession, and her methodical cleanup. "I've never seen such comprehensive evidence of premeditation," Stanton said. She documented her own crime in high definition. Forensic investigation quickly corroborated the video evidence. The experimental compound was identified in residue from the disposal system where she had dumped the original glass contents. Her internet search history revealed research on undetectable poisons and heart attack symptoms. Financial records showed purchases of surveillance equipment through various channels. Most damning were the judge's own digital notes, detailed plans recovered from encrypted files on her computer, including schedules, chemical formulas, and a checklist titled Perfect Justice, with each item methodically checked off. She approached murder with the same precise methodology she applied to her legal cases, explained the forensic psychologist assigned to the investigation. Her confidence in her intellectual superiority led her to document everything, creating the very evidence that made her conviction inevitable. When confronted with the footage, Judge Blackwood neither confessed nor denied her actions. Instead, she requested legal counsel and remained silent, her judicial training asserting itself even as her freedom slipped away. This case shows how technology can expose even the most carefully planned crimes. The very tools Judge Blackwood used to document her perfect murder became the evidence that ensured her conviction. The case sparked nationwide discussions about power, revenge, and the human capacity for compartmentalized morality. Inside the courtroom, prosecutor Maria Chavez opened with devastating simplicity. "Your Honor, members of the jury, the evidence in this case comes from an unimpeachable source, the defendant herself." The prosecution's strategy focused on methodically presenting the video evidence, allowing jurors to witness the murder exactly as it occurred. Experts testified about the poison's properties, detailing how Judge Blackwood had exploited her position to obtain it. Digital forensic analysts explained how the cloud backup system had preserved the footage she intended to destroy. Throughout these proceedings, Vivian Blackwood maintained the composed demeanor that had defined her judicial career. She sat ramrod straight, taking notes in precise handwriting, occasionally whispering to her defense team. Her expression remained neutral, almost academic, as if analyzing an interesting legal case rather than fighting for her freedom. She watched the video of herself committing murder with the same analytical detachment she'd show reviewing case law. One juror later revealed, "That's when I knew she felt justified in what she'd done." Her defense team attempted an audacious strategy: diminished capacity due to extreme emotional distress. They presented expert testimony on rejection syndrome and psychological trauma, arguing that Calvin's betrayal had triggered a temporary dissociative state. The strategy collapsed during cross-examination when Prosecutor Chavez displayed Blackwood's meticulous notes planning the murder over several weeks. "Does this look like diminished capacity to you?" Chavez asked the psychiatric expert, pointing to detailed chemical formulas and contingency plans in Blackwood's handwriting. The defining moment came when Judge Blackwood herself took the stand, a decision that shocked legal observers. Under questioning, she neither sought sympathy nor denied responsibility. Instead, she offered a clinical justification for her actions. "The legal system provides justice for some wrongs but not others," she testified calmly. "I applied the principles of proportional consequences to an injury the courts couldn't address." The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. At sentencing, Judge Raymond Martinez, a former colleague, delivered the final irony. "For decades you interpreted the law with wisdom," he told her. "Yet you ultimately placed yourself above it. 60 years without possibility of parole." The case of Judge Vivian Blackwood transcends ordinary criminal proceedings, challenging our fundamental understanding of justice, power, and human psychology. At its core lies a profound question: what happens when those entrusted to uphold the law decide they exist beyond its reach? Blackwood's transformation from justice's guardian to its violator illustrates what forensic psychologists term the corruption of authority, a phenomenon where prolonged power gradually erodes ethical boundaries. After years of determining others' fates, she developed a distorted perspective on her own moral authority. "Power doesn't merely corrupt in the traditional sense," explains Dr. Raymond Willis, criminal psychologist at Westlake University. "It creates alternative moral frameworks where people genuinely believe different rules apply to them." Judge Blackwood didn't see herself as breaking the law, she viewed herself as operating in a separate jurisdiction where she alone determined what constituted justice. This warped thinking was accelerated by what cognitive scientists identify as overconfidence bias, the tendency of experts to dramatically overestimate their competence outside their specialty. Blackwood's legal brilliance created a dangerous illusion of infallibility. She approached murder as a legal problem to solve, notes forensic analyst Dr. Patricia Chun. Her methodical planning reflected judicial thinking. Identify relevant precedents, anticipate potential complications, prepare countermeasures. But criminal investigation operates by different principles than legal argumentation. Her confidence in outsmarting the system became her vulnerability. The case also reveals deeper tensions within our justice system. While courts excel at addressing tangible harms, they provide limited remedies for emotional injuries. Blackwood's actions, though grotesquely disproportionate, stemmed partially from frustration with this gap. The legal system offers no meaningful recourse for many interpersonal betrayals, explains legal ethicist James Morrison. Blackwood's career immersed her in a world where every wrong had an official remedy. When faced with a profound personal injury with no legal solution, she created her own extrajudicial process. From a psychological perspective, revenge-motivated crimes follow distinctive patterns. Dr. Elizabeth Forrest, who studies revenge psychology, notes that such crimes frequently feature excessive planning, symbolic elements, and a desire for recognition. What distinguishes revenge from impulsive violence is its deliberative quality, Forrest explains. The perpetrator wants not just to harm but to communicate through that harm. Blackwood's confession to Calvin before his death wasn't impulsive. It was essential to her conception of justice. Without his understanding why he was being punished, her revenge remained incomplete. Perhaps most disturbing is how Blackwood's training facilitated rather than prevented her crime. The analytical thinking, attention to detail, and procedural knowledge that made her an exemplary judge provided the tools for murder. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature. That moral certainty can enable immoral actions, that justice and vengeance share disturbing similarities, and that even those who build their lives around law can fall victim to the lawlessness of obsession. Judge Vivian Blackwood's fall represents one of justice's most profound paradoxes. A woman who dedicated her life to upholding the law ultimately destroyed herself by breaking its most fundamental covenant. The gavel she once wielded with authority became the instrument that measured her own punishment. Her story offers several crucial lessons. First, expertise in one domain doesn't transfer to immunity in another. Blackwood's legal brilliance created a dangerous illusion of invincibility that clouded her judgment. Intelligence without emotional wisdom becomes a liability, not an asset. Second, no amount of planning can account for every variable. The hidden camera, her insurance policy, became the prosecution's most damning evidence. Even the most meticulous minds overlook critical details when operating under emotional distress. Third, power changes our perception of boundaries. Years of determining others' fates cultivated in Blackwood a fatal belief that she could create her own brand of justice outside the system she served. This psychological transformation didn't happen overnight but through subtle shifts in thinking that went unchallenged. Perhaps most importantly, her case reveals how revenge corrupts from within. The pursuit of vengeance didn't just destroy Calvin, it obliterated everything Blackwood had built, leaving a legacy defined not by decades of judicial wisdom but by a single act of calculated violence. This story reminds us that no one is above the law, not even its guardians. The line between justice and revenge may seem clear in courtrooms but blurs dangerously when personal pain intersects with professional power. If you want more true crime stories with powerful lessons, subscribe to Mr. Body Crime and hit the notification bell. What other cases of revenge gone wrong would you like me to cover next? Let me know in the comments.